for someone who has just joined, let's say, a tech startup or a, other industry with, say, several hundred to several thousand employees, or they're dealing with documentation and they're brand new, how can they move rapidly from just being from having a niche perspective to having a more holistic understanding, or as you call it, Topsight of the organization?
Right.
How quick? I mean, just what tips would you suggest? You have an entire book full of that.
That's right.
But just like if it was over the water, by the water, taking this, what suggestions?
Okay, so you have essentially 3 levels on which an organization works. There's this macro level, this top level of culture, history, organization, things that people are not terribly conscious of. There's a middle level, a meso level of goal-directed activity. These are the sorts of things that people know that they're doing throughout the day. So and then there's a micro level, which is the level of the little habits that people use to get things done. So if you stop somebody in the middle of writing a proposal and you say, "What are you doing?" They say, "I'm writing a proposal." They're not going to go way up to the top level and say, "Well, I'm creating shareholder value." Okay? And they're not going to go to the bottom level and say, "I'm typing the letters P-R-O," because unless they're a smartass. They might do that. Most of the time we live on that middle level, and I would say that's where you go to figure out, first of all, how this organization works. If you want to really parachute in and kind of get a rough sketch of how things are going, you take a little time to watch what people are doing, you ask them what sorts of tools that they mobilize, and you kind of just sketch out what sorts of divergent practices are involved. In other words, if persons A, B, and C are writing proposals, but they use completely different information sets to do that, if they use completely different tools to do that, that tells you something about how flexible the work is. It does not tell you who's right. In fact, one of the problems I think we have when we start a study like this, or we go into an organization, is that we want to find out the one right way. It's not necessarily going to be there. And so I think being able to kind of withhold judgment at first and just have an honest conversation with each person and find out why they're doing things, what they're doing, then you can kind of pull back and see what these larger patterns are.
What if someone has been in an organization for a while, they feel like they know it, they're pretty sure what's going on, but they've not done research before in their organization? How can they approach their own organization, to which they become naturalized, with fresh eyes and actually see the organization as a whole and not just as a result of their years of experience, I guess, to get a new perspective?
Right. Well, I mean, it's very, very hard to do. And in fact, when I push people through the different phases of the book, from designing the study to collecting the data to navigating what you have in the data, analyzing, and then writing a recommendation report, these different steps, I try to give people a lot of guidance in trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to look at? How do I gather the data in such a way that I can give everything a fair shake? And then when I get to the data models, how can I fill these out in such a way that I can discover something new? I think if you follow the process, you'll tend to find things that surprise you. And honestly, I think if you don't find anything that surprises you, that in itself is surprising. I think a really huge component here is that no matter how well you know your organization, you haven't been hanging around watching over the shoulder of all of your colleagues. If you take a little time to do that, and if you take a little time to talk to them about it afterwards, you might find that there are really surprising differences in how people do things, or even if they're doing the same thing, why they think they're doing it. The telecom study that I mentioned a while back, one of the first things that I did when I interviewed people is, I would have a printout describing their job description, their official job description. I wouldn't show them the printout. I would simply say, so in a few words, in your own words, what do you do in this organization? And it rarely matched the job description, because that's how organizations work. People kind of find and mold their own roles, and being able to kind of look away from that and look towards how they're interpreting what they're doing creates a lot of dissonance. Being able to find those points of dissonance, those places, and map them out, that's huge.
In your book, you also, I believe you mentioned harmony as opposed to the dissonance.
Yeah.
What traits, could you give us a couple examples of a harmonious or situation or work environment?
Right.
Because often it's tempting when we're doing research to always look for problems, what's wrong, and as you mentioned several times in the book, that many employees, if you're an outside researcher, they will see you as antagonistic or a tool of the boss, or if they show you any issues, it will come back on them. Could you give us a few examples of the harmonious situations or non-discordant and or traits which indicate that they're...
Right. Well, you think about it this way. When you find let's suppose you're watching somebody do something over and over again. Let's say processing paperwork. Sometimes you'll find that there are systemic errors. There are problems where when they get to this point in the paperwork, 3 times out of 10, they drop the ball or they have some kind of a problem. And if you find that across a lot of different people, it's not that each person is at fault. It means that there's some sort of an issue with either the paperwork or how they're processing it or what they're processing it with. So that's easy. When you find a disruption over and over again, you can localize it. But what people don't realize is that when somebody's going through that paperwork, or 10 people are going through that paperwork, and they're doing it perfectly each time, that's an achievement too. I mean, that's a remarkable achievement. That's pretty incredible. When you see a really complex procedure and nobody's dropping the ball, I think that's something worth reporting. I think that's where we get to the harmony, coordination.
Do you see that very much in the...
No. Well, I mean, that's why it's so remarkable. I mean, it's a huge achievement, and I think you tend to see it more in work that's really highly regulated, like let's say on an assembly line, or if somebody has a fairly narrow job where they process paperwork in very specific ways, and that's simply because it's repeated, it's regulated, it's something where they don't have a lot of latitude. Anytime you have people doing knowledge work that involves analysis or involves discretion, anytime you have a result that isn't necessarily predictable, you tend to have more flexibility and you tend to have more variance.
I'm just looking at the time. We've been chatting for about 20 minutes, and I don't see... Does anybody have any questions? Because what we can do is we'll maybe wait for a moment, and then if nobody has any questions, this is kind of in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
But
no worries.
All right. All right, so I don't see any questions showing up on the screen. So I think at this point, since there's no viewer questions, that we'll go ahead and call it an end to this part of the interview. Just wanted to remind people that, again, there's a forthcoming book review in technical communication. There will also be a follow-up interview with Clay in Intercom. And again, thank you to Intercom and STC in Lisbon for helping pull the sponsorship together and for spreading the word about this, as well as thank you, Clay, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And hopefully other people will interview you about the content. There are links for Topsight. See if you can, there's a better shot. There are links for Topsight in the chat box on the side, or you can just go to Amazon. You can read it in a Kindle Reader or on a Kindle, $9.99, and the hard copy is $24.99.
That's correct.
$24.99. All right. Thank you so much, and we'll go ahead and stop the broadcast now. And if you find this interesting and you want to embed or share the recording, please do. And have a great day.
Thanks.